Nearly 2,000 people have been killed as the Iran regime cracks down.
Thank you all for joining us tonight for what I expect will be a timely, substantive, and at times challenging conversation about Iran, its internal unrest, its regional ambitions, and what all of this means for Canada, for Israel, and for the broader Middle East. My name is Amanda Ashkenazi, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of HR Canada Charitable Organization. And before we begin tonight's discussion on Iran, I want to briefly explain why we're here and why this conversation matters. HR Canada Charitable Organization is dedicated to developing and delivering public education, including courses, lectures, and webinars that address religious, racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic intolerance, discrimination, and prejudice. At the heart of our work is the simple belief that intolerance thrives where complexity is flattened, where narratives replace facts, and where people are encouraged to think in absolutes rather than to understand context. Many of the most persistent forms of prejudice in our society today are not driven by ignorance alone, but by misinformation, oversimplification, and emotionally charged narratives, particularly when it comes to global conflicts, identity, and power. Tonight's discussion on Iran is intended to move beyond this and to engage the issue with clarity, context, and intellectual seriousness. Iran is not only a geopolitical actor, it is a regime whose ideology, regional behavior, and domestic repression have direct consequences for religious minorities, ethnic communities, women, journalists, and dissidents within Iran, across the Middle East, and even here in Canada. Understanding Iran's internal unrest, its relationship to regional instability, and how it's perceived by Israel and Western governments is essential for anyone seeking to engage responsibly with issues of intolerance, human rights, and democratic values, whether here in Canada or abroad. With that, we are deeply grateful to be joined by two people uniquely positioned to help us think clearly about this moment. Let me begin by introducing our host for tonight's discussion, Warren Kinsella. Warren is one of Canada's most recognizable and respected journalists, commentators, and political strategists. Over decades, he has worked at the highest levels of Canadian public life as a journalist, author, lawyer, and advisor, and has never shied away from difficult or controversial subjects. In fact, what distinguishes Warren, particularly for a conversation like this, is his insistence on asking the hard questions, not to provoke, but to illuminate reality. He brings a rare combination of political fluency, media literacy, and intellectual independence, and we are very fortunate to have him guiding tonight's discussion. Our featured guest this evening is Israeli journalist Amit Segal. Amit is Israel's most prominent journalist and a highly respected political commentator. He serves as the chief political analyst for Israel's Channel 12 News, the country's most watched news outlet, and is widely regarded as a leading interpreter of Israeli politics, security thinking, and public opinion. What makes Amit especially valuable for tonight's conversation is his ability to translate Israeli strategic thinking, including intelligence assessments, political debates, and security dilemmas, for international audiences without oversimplification. He understands not only what Israeli leaders are saying publicly, but how decisions are actually debated behind closed doors and how Israeli society processes existential threats over time. In moments of regional upheaval, whether related to Iran's nuclear ambitions, proxy warfare, or internal unrest, Voices like Amit's help cut through speculation and bring us closer to how these developments are genuinely understood on the ground in Israel. Thank you both, Warren and Amit, for taking part in this conversation. And with that, I'll turn things over to Warren Kinsella to begin tonight's discussion.
Amanda, thank you so much. And thank you to HR Canada for playing host to us today for this important discussion. And Amit, it's wonderful to meet you, albeit over Zoom. And I'm hopeful that where you are, you're having much nicer weather than we are having presently in North America.
You have snow falling, we have possibly Iranian ballistic missiles. So if you want to actually change places, I'm all for it.
That's a good point. It's all a matter of perspective. Well, maybe we should start there with a question about perspective. So, from Israel's vantage point, I mean, how is the current unrest inside Iran being interpreted? Is it a temporary flare-up, as we've seen in the past, or is it something structurally different from what we've seen in other protest cycles?
It's something unprecedented, and it's not me or the Israeli security apparatus that believes so, but the Iranian regime itself. And I would like to explain why. Today, the information gathered by the Israeli intelligence services says that the number of casualties on the 36 hours beginning on January 8th when the sun sets till January 10th when the sun rises is 30,000 victims, which makes it not only the deadliest night in the Iranian history, but the deadliest night since the Holocaust. There has never been a single event in which this number of casualties was recorded, since World War II. And even in World War II, there weren't many nights, many days with that number of casualties. So when Ayatollah Khamenei says on January 7th to his administration, do whatever it takes, end of quote, to end these protests, and then they shut down the internet and a digital darkness falls on Iran, and then with still the digital darkness on Iran, but with the intelligence we gathered, we understand the number of casualties, we get a hint of what happened in this night of infamy.
So you have so many contacts within the government of Israel and its intelligence establishment. Do the assessments that you've heard about and seen suggest that the protests now pose a genuine threat to regime stability, or are they still in control despite what those of us in the West are seeing?
So there are two ways to actually change a regime. One is a top-bottom, and the second is bottom-up. For many, many years, there was hope in Israel and in the US that it would be a bottom-up revolution. Why? Because it would be the Control Z for the last Iranian bottom-up revolution in 1979. So if in 1979 it was the Muslim crowd toppling a secular, liberal, pro-Western regime, maybe now it's going to be the other way around. However, I think the main assumption today is that it's going to be something different. And I would like to give two examples or two proofs. One is that during Rising Lion operation, Israel pinpointedly assassinated or killed only senior figures from the Revolutionary Guards. But the Iranian army was kept intact. So there was hope in Israel that the Iranian army would actually take over the country. I think everyone would have bought this scenario because the Iranian army is the moderate part of the Iranian establishment. It is focused on defending Iran from enemies from the outside, whereas the Revolutionary Guards, as we saw in the last tragic events, is focused on defending the regime from within. But I think the main assumption now is that what we are going to see is another version of dictatorship, but something more of Pakistan rather than the former Persia. That is to say, not a liberal, pro-Western, pro-Israeli country, but something of a fundamentalist yet relatively warm to the West, like Pakistan. Not better than this. But who knows, to be honest. That's the assumption right now.
No, and of course, and it's unfair of me to ask you the next question, but I'm going to anyway. And the New York Times has got half a page today on this very question. Their view, it seems to be, is that the regime is going to fall, although, as you point out, not necessarily into the hands of those who are friendly towards Israel and the West. Do you believe that the regime is in peril at this moment? Do you believe that they are going to fall?
I'll put it differently. Like the old song from the beginning of the millennium, things will never be the same again for Ayatollah Khamenei. We will never see again a country with self-pride, um, alleged democracy or limited democracy that actually in the steps of becoming a national, a regional superpower and on the verge of becoming a nuclear power. It's never gonna happen again. They don't have enough resources both to actually run the country, provide food, electricity, water, gasoline for the population, and preserving or fostering Hezbollah and the Iranian nuclear project. This has come to an end somewhere between June 13, when Israel began attacking the Iranian nuclear program, and December 28, when the first protesters stormed the streets of Tehran. So this is one thing. However, we can actually arrive in a situation in which it takes a lot of time till this regime falls. From everything I hear in the Israeli security establishment, they believe that this regime is finished. But it takes time in Iran. It took 11 months for Khomeini to actually become the supreme leader of Iran. And we might expect a time period that is measured by months rather than days or weeks.
In regard to the Iranian nuclear threat, the nuclear project, as you put it, from Israel's perspective, does the unrest reduce the immediacy of that threat, or does it make the situation even more unpredictable and therefore more dangerous?
Well, it's always more dangerous for the short run, but I would say as follows. There were reports some 2 weeks ago that Prime Minister Netanyahu had asked President Trump not to attack Iran under the fear that Israel would be attacked and there won't be enough interceptors, etc. From my acquaintance with Prime Minister Netanyahu, I would say that I'm quite convinced that had he known that the regime is on the verge of collapse, he would actually take the bullet for the country. I mean, he would actually take, I don't know, 100 ballistic missiles hitting Israel had he known that the Iranian regime is about to fall. So I think this is not the real thing. Israelis would be very even happy to spend a few days in the shelters if they know that this is the last time they actually sit in shelters. And I would like to explain something broader. Since 1982 till 2025 or even 2026, almost every Israeli who got killed or injured, both in Israel, in Judea and Samaria, on Gaza Strip, Lebanon, or even as a tourist hit by terrorists, took an Iranian bullet or suffered the Iranian explosives, if not Iranian manufactured weapons, so Iranian funded weaponry, and Iranian trained Palestinian terrorists, or an Iranian trained Lebanese commando militia members. So for Israel, from 1982 till today, this is the Israel-Iran war. So if there is an opportunity to topple this regime once and for all, I think Netanyahu will never tell Mr. Trump, listen, we are not prepared yet.
So, in light of that, in light of what you've said, do you feel that Israel has adjusted its military posture and moved the position of its red lines in any way in response to or as a consequence of the unrest in Iran?
I'll put it this way. Israel is not just watching or has not just been watching the situation in Iran. Israel is preparing. Israel has been prepared for many, many years for this moment to arrive. And I think that just like the Iranian regime or the Iranian security establishment is invested in trying to tear apart the Israeli society, so I guess that that Israel is invested in identifying the opposition in Iran and facilitating it in its efforts to actually bring back justice to Iran. It's not that Israel actually creates it, of course, and I don't think history taught us that it's quite efficient to try and change regimes. But Israel definitely tries to actually assist the Iranian opposition. We saw a visit here of the Shah, the son of the former king of Iran. And Israel would be very happy to see pro-Western forces actually taking over Iran. This is one thing. The second is that before the Iranian regime collapses, there is always this fear that as a last resort, either out of fundamentalism or a distorted calculation, they'll attack Israel because we're the small Satan and the US is the big Satan. So if the big Satan attacks us, so let's take revenge from the small Satan, little Satan. Unfortunately, I'm not sure it would be a very good calculation for them because it would give Israel an incentive to actually get into the military situation. I'll give you just one example. During Rising Lion operation, Israel uh, prevented or didn't attack the peninsula, the relatively small peninsula, smaller than Long Island, in which two-thirds of the Iranian economy are concentrated. Why? Because, in my opinion, it was the next move on the chess. Netanyahu and Khamenei have been played over the last few years. That is to say, listen, we know that you still have 1,500, 2,000 ballistic missiles, and we might not have enough interceptors, but if you attack us, we're going to destroy your economy once and for all. What's left of your Iranian economy, which even today is a shadow of its former self. So this is one thing that Israel can do. Second, if the Iranian regime falls, I guess we are going to see what we saw in Syria. When the Syrian regime collapsed in December 2024, in 12 hours, while the rebels are still celebrating in the streets of Damascus, Israel actually eliminated each and every strategic weapon held by the former Syrian army and conquered the highest point in Syria, Mount Hermon, in order to protect Israel and to prevent the weapon and the Hermon Mount from falling into hostile hands. So I guess we are going to see the same situation. But of course, Israel would prefer the US to attack. I mean, it's always better when someone else does the dirty job that usually Israel is demanded to do.
Well, let's talk about that. Those of us in Canada know it's somewhat difficult to predict what President Trump will do. Do you believe the Americans will intervene in Iran as he has hinted at, as he has threatened? And if so, what does that mean for Israel?
Okay, so first of all, I personally think that Trump is no Obama, and he will never allow a history books to actually determine that He was the second president in the 21st century to let protesters die in the streets without doing anything. So I think that the number one lesson from 2009, the Green Revolution, is that when there is enough opposition in Iran, the US should intervene. Of course, when the number of casualties is 15 times higher than it was in 2009. It was a massacre. It wasn't uh, protests. It was something worse than this. And the Achilles heel of the Iranian regime is the fact that they are, after a 5 to 15 consecutive years of water shortage, electricity shortage, sanctions, and of course a resounding military defeat um, from Israel and the US in June 2025. So this is one thing. The Iran regime would like to weather the storm, or their plan to weather the storm is just to duck for the next 3 years minus 1 week, or 3 years minus 4 days, until President Trump becomes an ex-president, is busy with building its presidential library, and a new president arrives, because they know that as long as President Trump is around in the neighborhood, they have no hope to actually recover their nuclear program, and they might don't even a hope to actually stabilize Iran. I think that they are about to collapse, but for out of fairness, I have to quote a very, very senior source in the region who I spoke to under terms of confidentiality last week in one of the capitals in the Middle East, and he assumed that Iran would actually survive the next 3 years. But, and this is the more optimistic side of the equation, he said that Iran is no longer a superpower in the region, and that it no longer possesses any threat to the existence of Israel and its neighbors.
So on that, and this is speculative, but you would know better, I think, than anybody. How much truth is there to the stories, the headlines, that Trump and Netanyahu are at odds with each other about how to respond and how to proceed forward? Is there any truth to any of that?
Okay, not really. First of all, every time we hear that Netanyahu and Trump are at odds, it ends up with the Iranian nuclear facility explodes as a result of a B-2 attack, or 20 live hostages coming back home, or yet another their bi-monthly meeting in the White House or Mar-a-Lago. So I wouldn't, I mean, I wouldn't, I would take it with a grain of salt. Uh, Netanyahu actually delivered a message from the head of Mossad to President Trump 2 weeks ago, stating that if you, President Trump, are under the impression that the attack you are planning is about to topple this regime, so the answer is no. So if you don't want to attack them, please ignore. There is no point in it. If you do want to topple the regime, please go back to the drawing table and do it from scratch. And that's what President Trump has decided. And we'll know in a few days whether his decision was to only threat Iranians or to actually attack them in a way larger scale.
Why do you think the next few days? Do you think that something is coming? Are your sources
Yeah,
telling
so
you that?
first of all, I don't know if an attack is imminent, but I know one thing for sure, that there are enough offensive facilities in the Middle East of the US Army in order to attack Iran. However, there aren't still enough defensive forces, defensive powers in the Middle East. So I would say it's gonna take a few more days. And then when it comes, I mean, the US is the world's biggest military and economic power in history. So I guess they can allow them to spend a few $1 billion on actually assembling all the, putting together all those, jet fighters and air carriers, etc. However, I think I'm not a historian, a military historian, but the last time forces in such scale were brought and were brought somewhere on Earth and nothing happened was in the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1961, which first happened more than 60 years ago, and second, involved a monstrous communist superpower. This is no longer the case here. There's nothing that they can do to the United States back, and that's why I think the ramifications here, from the perspective of the United States, are less of we are going to die in Washington due to a nuclear bomb, and more like of instability, we might fail. But when you keep in mind the Northern Star, which says, we will not let those protesters die in vain. My conclusion, only my conclusion, not the Israeli apparatus, nor, I don't know, sources in the Middle East, is that President Trump is definitely going to attack.
Hmm, interesting. Changing course just slightly. I'm Canadian. A lot of us are Canadians listening to you tonight. Um, Canada has historically, traditionally, always aligned itself with Israel and on Middle Eastern policy. But I now have a book coming out on this subject from Random House next month. Canada has become one of the worst places in the world for anti-Semitism, has been most receptive to anti-Israel and anti-Western propaganda emerging from Iran. Has this repositioned Canadian foreign policy, because it has been repositioned, has this been noted in Israel, and what is the reaction to it?
Yes, unfortunately, it didn't go unnoticed. Um, I guess many Israelis would be very happy to bury the hatchet with Canadians and go get back to the days of Stephen Harper, etc. But unfortunately, times changing. By the way, it's not only Canada. It's three out of the four largest countries, the largest English-speaking countries. The United Kingdom shifted to the left. They are preventive, their police are preventing Maccabi Tel Aviv football fans from actually even arriving at football stadiums in the United Kingdom because they are going to be attacked. So it's actually blaming the victim. Australia, we all heard about Bondi Beach, which didn't arrive in a vacuum. Something happened there. And of course, Canada. And I would say three and a half, because even the United States, with the very, very friendly pro-Israeli President Trump, is going under a fearful wave of anti-Semitism, which stems both from the far left and the far right. And these are interesting times, and it's a bit scary, I have to say, because my family, I know the accent doesn't tell it, but my family had made the Aliyah from the United States, the entire family.
Well,
And my mother made Aliyah at the age of 13. So for us, and by the way, my grandfather immigrated from Germany to the United States, which was a safe haven for Jews. So for us, American accent or English is the language of the free world, of the pro-Jewish, pro-biblical, pro-Judeo-Christian values. And to hear anti-Semitism articulated in this fabulous accent and with the language of Shakespeare and Churchill and you name it, and George Washington, it's quite sad, I have to say.
yeah, I agree. Well, let's a couple questions about protests. The first one would be these protests we've seen principally young people in the West repeating, this epistle of hatred that they've received ultimately from Iran online in the streets of North America, in the streets of Europe. What has the reaction been to that within Israel? How are people aware of it? And if so, how do they feel about it?
About which part specifically?
Just the anti-Israel and sometimes avowedly anti-Semitic protests that are taking place here.
Yes, so absolutely. It can be heard in Israel as well. There was a lot of attention devoted in Israel to those protests, to those sentiments, many attempts to actually change it, many voices wondering what can be done, if any. I'll give you an example. The budget that the Qatari government invests in actually poisoning the Western public opinion against Israel is something that I can measure with tens of billions of dollars a year. The Israeli budget is something like 1 billion shekels, $300 million. They outnumber us. The number of Muslims worldwide versus the number of Jews, the number of the algorithm of TikTok, which was till yesterday Chinese worldwide, and which was utterly distorted against Israel. Many things actually brought us into this situation. But I think now when people understand that in Israel, that this is the eighth front, not only Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, Syria, Judea and Samaria, Yemen, etc., but the information fight, the information war in campuses, on CNN, on Wall Street Journal, New York Times, in Canada, it actually once Israel devotes attention to something, usually it succeeds in solving it. Although I have to admit the challenge here is huge.
It is indeed. The other type of protest I wanted to talk to you about, which I think is much more positive, is just a few days ago in Toronto, more than 100,000 people in the Iranian diaspora and also the Jewish community marched in a snowstorm in
I saw it.
support of a free Iran. Just a huge event. Do things like that, just, you can give it to us straight. Do they help? Do they help the situation and the regime change that we all desire?
In Israel, of
Yes.
course.
What is the
I
perspective in Israel on an event like that? Is it
in
helpful?
in Iran or in Canada, I
In
guess you mean.
anywhere,
Okay.
anywhere.
Okay, so yeah, the most amazing fact that has to be remembered about Israel and Iran is this fact that this was the number one destination of El Al till 1979. There were two daily flights from Tel Aviv to Tehran and all the way back. This was the most favorite vacation destination, getaway destination for Israelis. The food was amazing. The streets were warm. The hospitality was, more than can be imagined. So the Israelis and Iranians are really invested in each other. And even today, when you meet Iranians abroad, usually the friendliest relationship is between Israelis and Iranians. So there is definitely a hope for regime change. As for the West, I think that there is a hope in Israel that more Westerns would understand that the challenges Israel has been facing over the last 2 years are not about Zionism or colonialism or anything else ends with ism, but about preserving the Western ideas. And I think that the most amazing example is the absurd that streets were empty, save in Canada, by the way, when the regime massacred tens of thousands of people. Why? Because Israel was actually interpreted as as the Western colonialist that try to oppress and suppress the local miserable Palestinians. So those who grew up on this woke culture and this, ethnicity interpretation for each and every situation through colonialist glasses or lenses, they are having hard times to understand that the so-called oppressed is the largest oppressor in the world as we speak. That these, miserable Muslims are those who killed the highest number of Muslims, more than Israel killed in 2 years, including, of course, 20,000 terrorists. In collateral damage, they killed innocent civilians. So that's why the streets are empty, and that's what Israelis are hoping would be understood right now, because the silence is resounding.
So let's talk about that. The proxies of Iran. So the instability there, how is it affecting Hamas and Hezbollah? Like, do they become more constrained or more restrained, or do they become more aggressive given what is taking place now in Iran?
Most of them no longer exist. Hezbollah was the most formidable power with the most casualties caused by it to Israel, and yet Israel destroyed Hezbollah in a brilliant war, beginning with the pager attack, something unheard of, and then the killing of Nasrallah and the entire military leadership. So Hezbollah is attacked on a daily basis by Israel, and it doesn't dare to actually respond. This was the number one enemy of Israel prior to the war. Hamas is finished militarily. I hope Israel would be smart enough this time not to allow it to rearm itself. But as we speak, it's no longer a threat. Existentially, it's no longer a threat. It can try to, I don't know, send a few tourists from here and there, but they are no longer this monstrous military that stormed Israel on October 7th. And the Houthis,
So
yes,
oh, go ahead. Go
and,
ahead.
and the Houthis, it's quite annoying to wake up to sirens every once in a while, but it's not a threat, an existential threat to Israel, and I smell a military operation coming to actually eliminating the threat as well.
So as you say, if Hamas and Hezbollah no longer exist, or they're finished, or they're no longer a threat, where is the next threat? Because Israel has, since its beginnings, has always lived with these existential threats. Where do you anticipate it might come from next? Is it Lebanon? Is it
Hmm.
Syria? Is it Gaza again? Where is it going to come from?
Turkey. Um, let's hope that the Iranian regime collapses. So there is a nothing. There is a difference between what you see and what you feel. Allegedly, there are no longer threats, existential threats on Israel. The Iranian regime no longer have a nuclear program or no ballistic missile program, no Hezbollah, no Hamas. But on the other hand, there is still huge hatred towards Israel in the Middle East. This is still a very hostile neighborhood. So it's like living in Canada, where you see that the forecast is, I don't know, something like 85 degrees, and yet you still live in Canada. So it doesn't make sense that it's gonna last forever. The winter is coming at some stage. So I believe it's Turkey um, for two reasons. One, it is ruled by a sort of Muslim Brotherhood, the most anti-Israeli, anti-Western force in the Middle East these days. And second, it has a past and possibly a future of a geostrategic regional power. They sit on a geostrategic spot controlling two seas, the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. They sit on two different continents, Europe and Asia, and they have growing influence in the Middle East. They have military bases in Somalia. They provide weapons to Sri Lanka, etc. They are in alliance with the nuclear Pakistan, etc., etc. That's the thing.
It is a hostile neighborhood, as you put it.
Hmm.
But there's been the change in Syria. Hezbollah and Hamas are largely finished, you pointed out. Iran is a shadow of itself. What does all of that do to Israel's relationship with the leadership in the Gulf states that surround it? Does it lead to a more happy circumstance than we've got at the moment?
Israel is a victim of its success when it comes to some Sunni states. Attacking Iran was a double-edged sword because that was, while desperately needed, it was the number one reason for instance, Saudi Arabia to sign a normalization with Israel for the sake of fighting the mutual enemy. But if Iran evaporated, if the Iranian threat has just evaporated, why would the Saudi Arabia pay the price in terms of the Muslim world in signing normalization with Israel? It got the commodity for free. When it comes to the UAE, however, I think that this not only normalization, the peace accords with the UAE is the number one achievement of Israeli diplomacy since maybe the peace accords with Egypt. And in some respects more than this because we haven't paid the price, territorial price. I think that a cooperation between Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and some other moderate Sunni Arab states is the number one asset of Israel. This is the real thing that is going to make Israel a real a part of the Middle East. I'll give you an example. When you live in Canada, in Toronto or in Montreal, you can take a flight to New York City and to drive south to travel south. You can drive. You can actually the plane can go to each direction. In Israel, you can just take your car and drive to the neighboring country because most of them are in war with Israel or with a freezing cold peace until the Abraham Accords, you couldn't have taken your a flight and to drive west directly. All of a sudden, you can do it. It's unheard of. So for it's extremely important for Israelis to understand that Arabic is not the enemy of the is not the language of the enemy. It's the language of the neighbor. And I'm the number one fan of the UAE, the normalization with the UAE, and I hope it continues thriving.
So in that new world, so let's say, as you point out, that the Iranian regime is on its last legs, and hopefully that is true. How does that reshape the Middle East strategically, and where would Israel stand in that new regional order?
Israel would be a very important factor. Israel began its war from its lowest point, and now it's definitely a regional superpower. So, as long as it keeps its friends close and its enemy closer, I think we can hope to have let's say, the next generation would actually enjoy the fruits of this very long, exhausting, sometimes tragic war that we've just experienced.
And to end on hopefully a happier note, do you think that we are actually witnessing the early stages of a post-Islamic Republic Middle East, or is that too much wishful thinking?
There are still many Muslims in the Middle East, but I think we are actually seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, my colleague from Channel 12 once said that in the Middle East, the light at the end of the tunnel is usually the train coming in front of you. I hope this is not the case this time. Um, but I do think we are going to see hopefully a better decade or maybe a better generation in the Middle East.
Here, here. We all feel likewise. Well, Amit, thank you so much for
Thank you.
answering my questions. Most grateful, but your perspectives and your wisdom about Israel and Iran and the region and Canada and the world. And so we're all very grateful for your knowledge and your
Thank you so
insight.
much.
So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I really hope to see you soon in Israel. In the, let's say in Israel today, the forecast said it's going to be a chilly day, 10 Celsius degrees, something like, I don't know,
Wow.
50 degrees. I
That's
don't
not
think I,
fair.
yeah, I know. I don't think we wore gloves a single time this winter or this decade, to
That's
be
not fair.
honest.
Well, when you
Yes,
come here, you can come stay with me and we'll make a snowman together.
great. Take care. Thank you
Okay,
so
well,
much.
Thank you, Amit, for sharing your insight and analysis this evening. And thank you, Warren, for guiding such a thoughtful conversation. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Conversations like this may not be easy, but they are essential, even here an ocean away from the heart of the conflict. We hope tonight's discussion has added clarity, context, and perspective to an issue that will continue to shape the Middle East and the world in the months and years to come. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation, and we hope to see you at our next webinar coming soon. Good night.